My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with Dr. Percy Gene Harris, a retired Cedar Rapids physician and the Linn County Medical Examiner for many years. Doctor, tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Durant, Mississippi, 1927.
What was your parents' names?
Norman Henry Harris, Sr. He was also born in Durant, Mississippi. And my mother was Glendora Roundtree. She was born in Mississippi, just a few miles from. She was right around Kosciuszko, but just a few miles from Durant.
What was your roots? Your folks?
They were my. Well, the first I knew of about the Harrises was when we went to Mississippi in 1979, and to look at the census. Blacks were not counted in the South, that is in the federal census, until 1870. So in the 1870 census, I found my great grandfather, who was Moses Harris, and his children. As I recall, I don't think his wife was there. I don't know what had happened to her. But that's all the information I have. And based on what his age at that time, we decided that he would have been born probably in about 1820 in Mississippi. What was interesting about that information, looking at that census tract, is that all of my grandfather and his children were all listed as mulatto. Later, some of the Harrises might have fit that. The later Harrises might have fit that description. But anyway, so in 1900, in 1880, he was not on the census. 1890 census, there was no census available. It was destroyed. And in 1890, of course, he was not there. But then I pick up my grandfather, Henry Harris. Now, Henry Harris might have been, it might have been 1900 when we first picked him up. But he and my grandmother, they had about 15 children. And in that 1900 census, listed 10, including my dad, who was a baby of the family, but also an uncle, Percy, after whom I was named.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I had a brother and a sister. My brother was Norman Henry Harris, Jr., and my sister was Hilda Harris. They were born in Durant, Mississippi, and lived. I don't know when they left home. She might have left it about in 1934. But when we moved to Memphis later, she lived with us for a short time.
Where were you in the lineup, the youngest?
I'm the baby.
You're the baby.
Yeah.
What was your dad's occupation?
My dad was listed as a mechanic for the Illinois Central Railroad. I looked at another census the other night and saw that he was listed as a laborer. But I'm sure he was a mechanic, sure.
And did you remember going to school when you first started school, or did they allow blacks to go to school? Or
well, blacks were allowed to go to school, and as I recall, we were allowed to go up through 6th to 7th grade, and that varied from place to place, I suspect, in the South. But I'm sure that I must have gone to school for a year, maybe 2 years in Mississippi. There is no record of it. The name of the school was the Holmes County Training School for Colored, as we were called in those days. And so I remember that one time my mother was unhappy. She had some unhappiness with the teacher. And I remember that she gave me a note that she had written for me to deliver to the principal. And the principal asked, he said, "Percy Gene, how old are you?" And I don't know, I was maybe 6. And he said, "Well, sure, you're okay, and you can be passed, and so I was. Now, as I said earlier, there's no record that I ever went to school. That means the records might well have been lost. But then the next, what I do recall specifically is that when we moved to Memphis in 1935, I did enter school there, and I was in school until the 5th grade.
When you were in Durant, was schooling a priority? When you think back now, was it even a priority for black children?
Well, I think it was for some. I had an aunt who was a school teacher. She was a Harris. But I don't know about any of the other Harrises. I had one of my uncles, Otha, was considered to be the rich Harris. Now, in those days, we considered rich as being, they call that colored rich. But the truth of the matter is, he was fairly well off. He was the owner of the 1929 or 30 Oldsmobile Coupe, which my dad was driving at the time of the accident, which resulted in his death. But my brother and sister both went to college. Now, and those colleges, as far as I can recall, are still around. And it was just, I was too young to, I don't recall any time that my mother discussed college with me. Of course, I was just a youngster when she died.
What was Durant like growing up in? Was it a very segregated southern town?
Very segregated, very southern, but I don't remember ever having any discomfort, any trouble there, any difficulties. I have fond memories about Durant, but I must say that those fond memories have been enhanced significantly by a return visit to Durant in 1979. I knew blacks, colored as we were called then. We knew our place, and we didn't cross the line, so we didn't have any trouble. We had the Harrises had white relatives, and that always that helps you. For example, my mother and our family could, if they went to a store to buy clothing, they could try on clothing before buying it, shoes and the like. And generally that was not a privilege, a courtesy rather, that was afforded to all blacks. But I don't, the thing I remember most about Mississippi, about Durant, is that I remember going to a movie, and we had to sit in it was just, you didn't question us. We sat up in the balcony. But I shouldn't make too much of that, because Waterloo was, and towns, certainly, I don't know, I was going to say towns in Iowa, but certainly theaters in Waterloo tried to do that.
What was Durant known for? Anything? Industry? Or?
They had, I don't know how large Durant was. For some reason, when we discussed this question, I have said that Durant was probably about 5,000. But it was a railroad town. Illinois Central had a roundhouse there, and that made it a significant. That was a significant entity for the people of Durant. There was also a company by the name of Love, Love, Love Wagon, and they made wagons, and it was a big company, and those were probably the two. Oh, and there was a wholesale grocer there. That was owned by a man who was probably our relative, but again, we were never able to pin that down. But they were a wholesale grocery chain store, and they supplied probably stores to goods to the to the retailers in that area and beyond.
Did your dad work at the Roundhouse?
My dad worked at the Roundhouse.
Did he ever take you there?
No, no.
I never recall.
My dad was when my dad was killed. I would have been 3 years of age. The following, I think the accident was in June, and the following September I was 3. I have no recall of anything about my dad.
And then how did you, with your mother and the three of you, your brother and sister, was she have any way to support you, or?
Well, yes, my uncles, I'm sure, helped her, but we didn't have any difficulties that I recall. The uncles, Uncle Sonny or Other, I'm sure that he helped us. But our home was next door to the Harris family home, and they took care of my mother and took care of me.
Was your dad by himself when he was killed in the auto accident?
No, my dad, I and a cousin were in the car, a 12-year-old cousin, who was the lady that his mother had raised my mother. She was my great aunt. But anyway, we had gone over to another county to see my grandfather, the father of my mother. My mother was born out of wedlock, and Elijah Clark there was no question about the fact that he was our grandfather. But anyway, we had gone over to visit my brother and sister, who were spending a part of the summer with my grandfather. Now remember, this is only about 12 miles away, but 12 miles was a great distance in those days. And it was on our way back from that visit that we just outside of Durant that he had the accident. And the official cause of death was drowning, and there's no reference to the automobile accident on the death certificate. But,
did your mother stay in Durant then, or did she?
We stayed in. Yes, that was in 1930. And we stayed in Durant, remained in Durant until 1935, at which time my mother married a man who was, again, a railroad man, and we moved to Memphis, which was his home.
And then how long did you live in Memphis then?
We lived in Memphis until, I lived in Memphis until 1941.
You lost your mother someplace along the
Yes,
line here.
my mother died in 1938, and my sister, who lived with us with her baby, had died in 1937, and in 1936, late 36, it might have been, my sister's baby, who was almost a year old, died.
From what?
Well, the baby died from the official. The death certificate says from pneumonia, and my sister died from pulmonary tuberculosis, and about a year later, my mother, who had tuberculosis, dating back to at least 1934, and it might have been earlier, she died in 1938. Now, a year, and this was in Memphis. They died at home. I witnessed my mother's last breaths. A year following her death, I was placed in a tuberculosis sanitarium in, I guess it was Oakdale, Tennessee, and I was there for 2 years for treatment of pulmonary tuberculosis. Now they said on later checking the records that I had what they call glandular TB, and there was no treatment basically for tuberculosis except rest, diet, and sunlight. And so I was there for those 2 years, and I think as look back on it, I think that I cried every day I was there. It was a difficult adjustment for me.
What, you're 11 years old, 12 years old?
I would have been, let's see, 30, 38. I would have been 11, yes.
And you lost your family, and you found yourself in, I suppose it was the sanitarium just for people with tuberculosis?
Well, it was for children who'd been exposed to it, children who might have, for some reason, in my case, I'm not sure if they had the skin test for tuberculosis at that time. But I think that what they probably did is that anyone who had lived with a person who had tuberculosis, probably they followed them with chest X-rays. And my chest X-ray showed that there was a gland in the left lung, the upper region of my left lung, and based on that, that's what placed me in that sanitarium.
Was tuberculosis very prevalent in that time period?
Oh yes, I should have checked this, but pulmonary tuberculosis was a big killer of in this country and probably in Europe from the maybe the late 1800s up until the maybe the early 1900s, and as I said, there was no treatment for it at the time. If you got tuberculosis and you survived it, it was a matter of just good luck for you.
Could you have contacted this from your mother?
Oh yes. Yeah. But my brother also had pulmonary tuberculosis, but he did not live with us. My mother did. By this time, my mother knew some things to do to protect me, and there was very little face-to-face contact between my mother and me. What she did at those nights when she bathed me, and in those days you were bathed once a week in a tin tub. And after bathing me, she'd kiss me on the bottom of my feet. But and that was part of her way of protecting me.
Yeah. Did you ever have a relapse in later years?
No.
Never did.
I really never had pulmonary tuberculosis. And incidentally, that little spot is still in my lungs.
Yeah.
But I mean, they can see it's calcified and it's there, so it's not active.
So when did you leave the South?
Well, I left in I went to 1941. I was discharged from that sanitarium, and shortly after that, my aunt had me come to Waterloo to visit her.
How did you get to Waterloo?
Train. Yeah, we were, I've been up and down. I can recall that over the years, I was up and down the Illinois Central Railroad on many an occasion because we traveled. We had passes, so riding on a train was basically free. So anyway, I took the train.
She lived in Waterloo. Did she have a job in Waterloo? Or?
My aunt was a fortune teller, and she was married to a man by the name of John Hoosman, who was worked for the Illinois Central Railroad. But I don't remember. I don't remember what he did. Probably worked again in the roundhouse at Waterloo. Waterloo was a big Illinois Central town.
Did you know your aunt before you went to Waterloo?
Sure. Yeah, I remembered her. She was, but I don't remember when she left Durant. But probably before 1935. And I don't really, that's a good question because I knew her well enough and she thought enough of me to get me out of Memphis. And I'm not sure, looking at my life, the way things turned out, that was the right thing to do. But if I had stayed in Memphis, I would have gone. My stepfather would have sent me to college, I'm sure. But anyway, she wanted me to come to visit. And she simply was not going to have her baby brother's baby living with a step-parent. So I went to Waterloo, and that was it.
Did you ever feel she had any mystical powers as a fortune teller?
She made a good living.
Did she really?
Oh yeah, she made a very good living. She was. She had a crystal ball, you know, and she also read palms and tea leaves and coffee ground patterns from cups. And I remember when in Waterloo that, you know, it was kind of the thing to do, young white girls going out an evening together. They would go see Madame Housman and have their fortunes told.
Did you ever feel that maybe there was something to some of the things? A lot of people back in that time period believed in that power.
Based on what the answer to that is, I don't really recall how I felt, but I do know that from time to time there were stories. People would come to my aunt who say had lost a personal item, and as I recall, maybe she never talked about her failures, but I recall that on more than one occasion that she was relating how she had told that person where to find their lost item.
So, did she get you into school in Waterloo?
Yes,
right away.
She did. She did.
What grade did you start in Waterloo?
I think it started in the 9th grade, and I had not had, when I left Memphis, before I went into to that tuberculosis sanitarium, I left Memphis. I was in the 5th grade, so no school in that while I was in that facility. And then when I went to Waterloo, I had a nurse there had made a report card for me, and she simply thought that I should go into the 8th or 9th grade. Must have been the 9th grade, and so I went to East Junior High, and I stayed there until that was 41. And I think that I might have remained in Waterloo until early 42, but I left. I had trouble with my aunt's husband, and so she sent me to Chicago to stay with her daughter, my first cousin.
When you went to Waterloo, did you find that a big culture shock for you that you'd been in a small town for so long and in a sanitarium for so long, and all of a sudden you find yourself in Waterloo is a good-sized city?
Yes. Well, I don't know if the size of the city was
or going to school all of a sudden with 9th graders, 8th, 9th graders.
Going to school, yeah, as I look back on that, the shock was probably just being around so many Caucasians, and I'm not sure that shock is the right word, but I think that I didn't have any trouble in school with people. I was probably not. I was not prepared to go into the 9th grade. In fact, I've never recovered from that. But it was a shock. It was a shock to the teachers because the nurse who had made out this report card for me had all ones on it, subjects I never had. I hadn't studied any of those subjects, but a 1 was equivalent to an A, and so they didn't know what to think of me.
There was no records probably from your prior
Oh,
years.
absolutely. There are no records of any of this, but that's the way it was. I had years ago. I wrote to I had written to the Waterloo school system to see what they had, and I asked about that card, and they said, we have no record of that. But what I wanted to tell you is that there's a lady here by the name. She lives in Fairfax, Her name is Edna Linacek. And I saw, and Miss Linacek taught in the school system in Waterloo. And there's also a lady by the name of Mabry. But I mentioned Linacek because I have seen her in the past, say, 5 years. And suddenly she shows up, and I've seen her several times. And at an NAAC banquet recently, if I didn't say it, Miss Linacek didn't have a good reputation with the black students. Now, I don't know, I don't know what the problem was. I did not have any trouble with her. But clearly, I was a source of trouble for them in some way. But I didn't really, as I might have said before, I was not a bad boy. I liked girls, and they didn't like some of my choices of girls. I do know that they wanted to, because I'd been out of school, I'm skipping ahead, I was old enough to be drafted for World War II. And I became old enough while I was at East High School. The principal and the assistant principal wanted to get me out of school. So when I was drafted, I informed the draft board that I was still in school. And from what I understand, the principal, they were encouraging the draft board to take me. The draft board said no. He's only 18, and he's 18, or was it 19? 18, I guess. And he's still in school, so we won't draft him. Of course, the war was over, and that became a moot point. What I wanted to say about Miss Linacek is that it relates to the fact that they were aware that this was a big adjustment problem for me. They knew about this. Was now I'm in junior high school. I mean in high school at East Waterloo. But at this banquet about 4 or 5 years ago, I saw her, and it was nice to see her. I first discovered her one day. I was making rounds here at the hospital, and I saw this chart that said Edna Linacek. And this was maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I went in to see if it was the Edna Linacek who was at East Waterloo High. And it turned out it was. And so I saw her off and on, maybe when she was in the hospital following them. But at this banquet one night, before the banquet started, we were walking around. I was walking around greeting people I knew. And when I came to Miss Linacek, we got into this discussion. And I said something about, as I look back on my years and those early years in school in Waterloo, I said, I don't think that people understand the problem that I was having. I said, clearly I didn't understand it. And Miss Linacek said, we did, Percy, we did understand. And I thought about that, and she's right. They did understand, and they, I'm sure they did what they could, but there wasn't much they could do. But
was the schools in Waterloo, were they segregated?
Basically. Well, the town was segregated, primarily by as a result of housing. Basically, all of the blacks in Waterloo lived at that time on the east side of town, and there were probably a handful of blacks on the west side, which was considered the well-to-do section of where the well-to-do people lived. But Waterloo was the schools were not segregated. But restaurants were probably were segregated. And as Lilia might have mentioned to you, though Lilia was from a family, her father was well known, there were some places where after school she would go to, say, get an ice cream cone or something like that. They would serve her with the intention, of course, of having her go elsewhere and eat.
Mm-hmm. Then you went to live with your aunt in Chicago for a while, didn't you?
No, it was her her daughter.
Okay.
And I lived with her in Chicago for a while. My life in Chicago, it was, everything turned out all right.
Did you have a job?
Did I have a job? Well, I was in high school.
Well, you had mentioned you worked for the post office.
Well, but that was what happened is that, and that might have been 42. It was a Christmas job, and
where they took on extra people during the
I worked
holidays.
at Parcel Post. Yes, we made. It was a job that paid well. So, but I decided in those days, you think of this in terms of the difficulty of getting a job at the post office. Now, the competitiveness of getting into the post office. Well, then, if you wanted to stay and work, become a full-time postal employee, which I elected to do, I did, and so the money kept me from going back to school. Yeah. But it led to some other difficulties later. But
did you finally decide maybe it would be better if you did leave your job and go back to school, or did somebody help you with this decision?
I didn't have anyone who really cared. My cousin, who was a very beautiful woman, I lived with her with her family. It was one large room, and then a little small room that had a curtain as a divider. That's where my cousin and her husband slept, and the rest of us may have been. Actually, can't remember if my cousin had started having children again at that age, but the daughter with whom I lived, her daughter and I were about the same age, and we were very close. Mm-hmm. She's still alive in Chicago, but I lived with just the two of them. Mm-hmm. Actually, there were the four of us, and I think it's later. Well, not I think, but later she had another child and started having children all over again. Yeah.
And then,
all lived in that little.
When you went back to Waterloo, then you graduated from Waterloo East?
Waterloo East.
What year would that have been?
I graduated in 1947. I was a mid-year graduate.
Did you have any idea yet what you wanted to do with your life? Had you given it any thought?
I don't know if I thought in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. I'm not sure that I was thinking that far down the road, except that I wanted to be a pilot. And
why?
I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and that was a dream. Although later I learned about I didn't learn about the Tuskegee Flyers until many years later. But the other thing I wanted to do, other profession that I really wanted to become a part of, was a medical profession, and I wanted to be a psychiatrist. Not even sure I knew what a psychiatrist was, but that was my goal. Now, you know how kids in Waterloo, and Waterloo is basically, in terms of the black community, a small town where all of the blacks knew the kids. And for some reason, they always assumed that, people say, well, Percy's going to be a lawyer. Well, I was always going to be a lawyer.
Did you have a lot of girls? Girlfriends?
In high school, yes. Yes, I did. In Chicago, I had one. I think I just had one girlfriend. But in Waterloo, I had a number of different girlfriends, and then finally Linn, and after that was it.
Was you a sharp dresser? I have a feeling
I
you were.
Well. I always, I was considered different because I always wore a suit, a tie, and when it was the weather called for it, an overcoat, and always wore a hat.
So you met Lilia in high school?
Lilia, I would have met her, and she might have been in junior high. But yes, junior high. Yes, junior high.
Yeah. What was
But
her,
I was ahead of her.
what was your dad? What was her dad's occupation?
He was a medical doctor, practiced in Waterloo.
And do you think that had any rubbed off on you? Had any influence, possibly later years?
On me?
Yeah.
No, because I didn't really know. I didn't really know him. I knew him and respected him, but he did not. The only time I remember having a conversation with him was when I went to see him when I was sick. Well, I was sick one time, and another time he was. I had gone over to Linn and I were seeing each other, and I went over to her house when her parents were not there, and I don't remember if that was if that was intentional. You know, I knew that they were not going to be there, or what. But we didn't do anything. I was just there, which was very inappropriate. He later called when he found out about it. He called me and asked if I'd come down to his office and talk to him. And he said, you know, I have a great deal of respect for your aunt. You knew my aunt well. They were not social friends, but he knew her well. He said, I have a great deal of respect for your aunt, and he said, I would want you to have respect for me and for my family, and would ask that you not do that, that you not visit my house when my daughter is. When we're not there. And he was very nice about it, and that was the end of it. I had some feelings about her dad, which probably they might not be justifiable, but I had been in a little trouble in Chicago as a teenager, and my aunt had to get a lawyer to handle this matter, and so she went to her lawyer in Waterloo, Attorney Fields, who was a good friend of Dr. Ferguson, and Attorney Fields arranged for an attorney in Chicago to take care of this, and he did, and I just always assumed that he probably told Dr. Ferguson about this. Now, I could be dead wrong on that. There have been things that I have thought to be a gospel truth. Years later, you find out that, well, that was not right. But I think that the other thing is that Lilia thinks that he did not want her fooling around with this kid from Chicago.
Was it proper for the boy to ask the father for permission in those days, or to marry her?
Well, we were a long way from that in those early years. I guess it would have been, but that was Lilia was in junior high school. That was not, and I don't. Then Dr. Ferguson had a stroke. This would have been 1948. Lilia was still in. Well, she graduated in 48. And I don't remember when he died. I remember, though, that, what a big shock it was to the family and to the community. But following his death, I started seeing Lilia more and more frequently. And Lilia's mother and I became very, very close. And she liked me very much, and I liked her.
So the two of you knew each other quite a long time before you married each other, didn't it?
Well, yes.
Kind of like childhood.
Sweethearts. It was not childhood sweethearts. That didn't start until later. But I knew Lilia's brother before I knew her, and they lived in. And I took a liking to him, and I taught him to build model airplanes and things like that. But, as I think of it, that was before her dad died. But I don't remember having any contact with either one of the parents, except that our association, my association with the son, was fine.
So what year did you get married?
We were married in 1950.
And where did you get married, Percy?
At St. Peter Claver Catholic Church in Waterloo, July 8th of 1950.
Were you a Catholic or your wife?
No, my wife is Catholic, and the family was Catholic. St. Peter's Church was a mission church in Waterloo. It had been built primarily to keep blacks from going to St. Mary's, which is not too far from them. But again, that's history, and it worked out and turned out very well.
Could you afford to go on a honeymoon at that time?
Maybe we couldn't afford it, but we went on one. Her family owned, I think in association with Attorney Fields, they owned a cabin that was on the Wapsie River in a town near Otterville, which is someplace around Independence. And so Lily and I spent our honeymoon there. Her mother made available to us their car, which was a 1948 Oldsmobile. And so we that was where we spent our honeymoon.
What time of the year did you say this was?
And we were married in July.
In July.
Yeah.
That was a pretty nice honeymoon to
It
stay
was,
at a cabin.
It was, yeah. And, I was. It was primarily a place where her dad would go for fishing or just relaxation with his friends. And Lilia tells, if you talk with Lilia about that, the day following I think we were married on a Saturday. I'm not sure, but I told her on the next day, let's drive around, and I was looking for a baseball game. But her mother, I was reading a letter the other day about that I had written to her mother, and one day I was visiting there in Waterloo, and visiting Lilia's home, and her grandmother, her mother's mother, I was probably chatting with her or just sitting there, and also Lilia's baby sister, Becky, was in the room, and her mother was out in the kitchen. Lilia's mother, for all practical purposes, someone just seeing her thought that she would think that she was white. She was very light-skinned, and her Lilia's grandmother, Mama Williams, they call her, said, "Percy, you look sad." Lilia was not there. Lilia was away in college at this time. And Becky, her sister, said, "I know why he's sad, Mama Williams." He said, Lilia is not here. And I don't know, she said something else. And I looked out in the kitchen, and her mother was blushing. And because she knew that we were going together. But it was all right.
So, what did young Percy decide he was going to do with his life once he got married?
Well, what I wrote to, I had to go. I knew I had to go to school, and so I had applied for Howard University, and that was probably, I might have applied before we were married.
Where is that?
Howard University is in Washington, D.C. It is predominantly black. Received in those days, and probably still does today, it's major funds from the federal government. Howard was named after General Howard. And so I had learned by this time that the Air Force was there's no way that I would be able to do that, because even then the high school the Air Force required that you have a 2-year college education before, at least 2 years of college. But the Air Force was basically segregated And the only blacks who flew planes, and they were the best that the Air Force ever had, were the Tuskegee Airmen. What's interesting, as an aside about the Tuskegee Airmen, is the number of airmen who were from Iowa. They were the cream of the crop in the nation.
So did you find yourself liking college life at Howard?
Oh yes, I guess I didn't finish that. When we first moved to Washington, Lily and I lived in a very nice home with her sister's brother and sister-in-law, and we stayed with them until we were able to find a place, afford a place of our own, and then we rented a room in a home. We lived in a couple of different places, but always very nice places. And her mother helped us. But anyway, to get back to the point about D.C., before we moved to Washington, I had contacted Representative H.R. Gross. Now, I knew H.R. Gross well, and this is not a matter of name dropping. I knew him well. I had come to know him before he was a congressman. He was a newscaster, and he was in 1948, maybe the nation, but certainly in Iowa, the packing houses were striking. Iowa, the Taft-Hartley bill was probably being debated, and Iowa was debating its own version of the Taft-Hartley bill. But there was at Rath Packing Company there was a strike, and there was not a riot, but a great upheaval, and during that time, a man was shot and killed. Black man, who was what they call a scab, and he shot a white man who jumped on when he was going to work. This man jumped on his car and he shot him and killed him, and there was quite an uproar about that. But anyway, there were people who were, and I don't remember I knew H.R. Gross, and I come to know him better during that period following that uproar at Rath Packing Company, and he was about to be attacked, and I said to the persons who were about to attack him, I said, "He's a friend, don't bother him," and they left him alone. H.R. Gross was I think I was representative from that district at the time, was a man by the name of Gwynn, and I think that anyone could have beaten Gwynn, and Gwynn might have been a Democrat, but H.R. Gross won. H.R. Gross remembered me, and when we knew we were going to Washington, D.C. to live, I had written him to ask if he could help us with it, help me find a job. Truth of the matter is, Leah was the one who got the reasonably good job.
Did Leah find work?
Yes, Leah worked for first of all, I had a job, and I worked for, my first job was at Georgetown. I worked in the priest dining room at Georgetown University. I had gone there because they'd advertised for waiters, and when I saw what a waiter had to do, I knew that I couldn't handle those big trays. I didn't understand that at all. So I asked if I could wash dishes, and so I was a dishwasher, and I stayed there until school started. I got a better job. I became an elevator operator at a new high-rise apartment building on Upper Connecticut Avenue, and I worked there until I went to med school, through undergraduate school.
When did you decide, how far through college or how did you decide that you wanted to go the medical route?
Oh, I was pre-med from the very beginning. And to ask me how, I was pre-med.
Okay.
I was pre-med, and I was a zoology major.
Yeah. So I imagine you had some pretty slim pickings living in Washington, D.C. and going to college. And
What do you mean slim?
you didn't have a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Did you have any children yet, or?
No, not. By the time we left D.C., we had 4 children. But yes, things were tough. But Lilia's mother knew a lot of people in D.C., and all of them helped us. And of course, as I said, she did too. But and at some point, Lilia, this might have been when I started med school, maybe as a senior. Lilia worked for she worked at the Pentagon, and she was, she was a good typist and a very, very diligent worker. She didn't fool around, and that was appreciated by her supervisors, I'm sure. But she had another job. But I remember some of and then the other thing that really helped us was my sister-in-law, her sister Betty Jean Ferguson, who lives in Waterloo. Mm-hmm. She came out and stayed with us and worked, and she worked for the CIA, and that her purpose in doing that was to help us.
And I imagine Washington at this time, it was still segregated.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was segregated. The restaurants. I don't know about the restaurants, but the People's drugstores. If you're familiar with D.C., they had there was a large chain, and they had restaurants. Not restaurants. They had food counters, and we could. Blacks couldn't use those. I mean, we're not welcome there. The theaters, movie houses were segregated, and I can remember on one occasion that Lilia and I tried to go to a movie, and we were told that by a person who was very nice, and she said, "I'm sorry, but this is a segregated house." You will recall that, the movie is segregated. The theater was segregated. Now, there might have been there were other theaters, movie theaters, where blacks could go in D.C., but that was not one of them. You will recall that the discrimination against that was present, was directed at American Negroes. You could be a black person, but if you were West Indian or if you were British, you would go to a theater, and if they said that to you, if they told you that you couldn't go there, told them that they could not go there, or if they went to a restaurant, the same kind where I could not go down and sit and be served, or sit while they waited, while an order to take out was prepared for me, my friends and any other black who was not an American citizen would simply flash their passport, and that was it. So you'd see that, and that was legal. I call that, and it was legal discrimination, and that was not changed until the Civil Rights Bill of 1965, 64, 65. I can't remember, but only then did legal discrimination.
Yeah. You had mentioned the fact that you were the class president all 4 years in Howard
and I'm still
University.
class president. I've been class president forever, Washington D.C. The biggest responsibility that I had in connection with that as a student, my responsibilities when we were in school were you had to do whatever you could for the class, but I think at the 25th reunion. It was my responsibility to give the address to give the honors and oath day address, But I'm still president.
So, 1957, you got your medical degree.
I graduated, yes, 1957.
At that time, did you have any idea where you may get an internship?
Well, yes. I knew by this time, my brother-in-law, Lilia's brother-in-law, was, and incidentally, while we didn't talk about that, the member of her family that I knew best was her sister, her oldest sister, Martha Ann. There are those of us who considered that she was the most beautiful girl in Waterloo, and let me tell you, she was very attractive. She was a playground director, and I was one of those little teenagers who did everything we could to
Get her attention.
Get her attention. That's right. And she always just kind of rolled with that. And then and even after that, when I was dating Malia, the relationship between Martha Ann and me was good. And I always, she was, we think of her, Martha Ann, she was about 2 years older than that. She was born in 1925. But anyway, that relationship with her was, every day during the summer at the playground, down at Lawndale Park in Waterloo, which was, it was not segregated, but it was an area that blacks, most of the blacks lived. But anyway.
Did she help you in finding or making a decision for come to Cedar Rapids, or?
No. Let me see. What was the question? I've forgotten it.
I had asked you at the time you had got your medical degree if you had any
about
idea.
Internship. Well, I got on that story about Martha Ann because her husband was also he was a med student. And he graduated from, Warren graduated from Creighton in I don't remember. But, let's see, I was 53, maybe 55, 56 or so. And he started to practice in Waterloo. Well, but he interned in Sioux City. And so when and internships, at the time of my graduation, internships had just begun to open up for blacks throughout the country, and also the pay had increased significantly. So I knew that Lily and I always said that we would live in Iowa. We would not go back to Waterloo. Probably in those days, our favorite town was Cedar Falls. So anyway, I learned of the internships in Iowa. In Cedar Rapids, there were both hospitals offered internships. The hospital where my brother-in-law had interned in Sioux City, I think that they had discontinued their program. There were two other places that would have been available, the University of Iowa, which I probably wouldn't have been successful in getting into that internship. And I don't know that, but I did not apply. I applied to two places, Mercy and St. Luke's in Cedar Rapids. And that's how we got to Cedar Rapids. Mm-hmm. St. Luke's took me. And that's a long story. And I won't go into that, but I was the first black to intern at St. Luke's, the second black to intern in the city. And the reason I was able to intern here is because the first black, a fellow by the name of Mayfield, who interned at Mercy, he was warmly accepted, did an excellent job as an internship. St. Luke's was watching this, and so after he had finished his internship, they decided, well, they would make this move. And so they did, and I came here and been here ever since.
Did they provide housing for
Yes, that's St. Luke's and Mercy provided housing for interns and for interns and their families. if I had selected Mercy, and it's as I look back on that, the reason I selected St. Luke's over Mercy is that you had to consider what facilities do they have for children, what not facilities, but what kind of accommodations do they have for interns who have families.
Because you had 4 children.
We had 4, and March was good. That following March, we had twins, so we had 6 altogether. So, but we at the time of my internship, I think we knew Leah was pregnant, but maybe we didn't know that. Yes, we knew that.
So where did they find housing for you when you first come to Cedar Rapids?
Well, let me just say this, that Mercy, the reason I did not select Mercy is Mercy didn't have anything available at the time for accommodations for interns with families. And St. Luke's didn't either, but we knew that both of those facilities both of those institutions would have housing for all of their interns, we thought. When we came to this town, it turned out that Mercy had developed quite an area which was fenced in for the interns. St. Luke solved their problem. Not the problem, but they found housing in a different way. They had a realtor who looked. There were 12 of us who interned at St. Luke's. They had a realtor look for homes, apartments for 11 interns. What did I know? I've forgotten already how many interns. I think there were 11 or 12 of us, but let's just say there were 12. They looked for accommodations for 11 interns and for 1 black, and that's where they ran into trouble. They were not able to find a place for me, for Lilia and for our family. And so when I first came, and that simply is because there were according to the realtors, there was nothing available for blacks. So I stayed. Lilia went to Waterloo to stay with her mother, and I went to. I stayed. I stayed in the hospital. Now, while there were people who, I just want to say that while there was difficulty in this, there were people who, it was difficult finding a place for us to stay. But I want to say that there was at least one doctor, a doctor who still lives and still alive, he and his wife, and he lived on Linden Drive, and he said, "Percy, you and your family can come stay with us until you find a home." Well,
what year was this, Percy, when you come to Cedar Rapids?
1957.
1957?
My internship ran from July 1st of 1957 to June 31st, 31 days in June, whatever. Last day of June of 1958. And I started my practice in July of 1958.
Okay, so you hung out your shingle in where? This was what you would call a family doctor?
No, well, yes, but it was a general rotating internship, which was probably the training that those who were going into family practice, a general practice, that was the extent of what they did. That's all different now.
Yeah. So where was your office, your first office?
The Guarantee Building.
And did you go in with some other doctor?
No. I was in, 4th floor of the Guarantee Building.
Did you have a problem building up a clientele base?
Well, yes, it was slow for me. But
because you were black, or because you were a new doctor and nobody knew about you?
Probably both. But I was being black was a big issue. Little jobs, which were bread and butter issues, like doing insurance exam physicals, that was not available to me. Being a company physician was not available to me. I don't know if I mentioned, no, I haven't mentioned this, but at some point, but I became I became a deputy coroner, and then later coroner, but that put me in contact with Cedar Rapids police officers, and today many of those persons I met remain good friends.
Did any other doctors help you try to get started?
Yes.
You had
Dr.
mentioned
Estes.
And
Dr.
you had mentioned
Maury Estes.
You mentioned a Dr. Thaler.
Well, that's a different story.
Okay.
About Dr. Thaler. Someone, Dr. Bill Hayes, had suggested to me. He said, "Percy, why don't you go over and talk with Howard Hall and ask him if he can help you?" So, being naive, I went over and talked with Mr. Hall. I called him, and he said, "Yeah, come over, I'll talk to you." And also there was Mr. Riley, Tom Riley's father. And I told him what I wanted to do. I mean, what I was asking. What could you? I understand that Dr. Thaler is, is your doctor. And I said, but if there's anything extra, would you allow me to provide you some medical services? And he said he was very nice. He said Thaler took care of everything, but he would tell him if there was anything that he could help me with to do so. I later learned from someone, I was telling another doctor what I had done, and he said, "Dave, Thaler won't like that." So I quickly apologized to him, and nothing came from that. But the first big thing, big opportunity that I thought I had was from the city. Stuart Schenck, who was the finance commissioner, his daughter was a student nurse at St. Luke's, and I had met her. I was very popular at St. Luke's because I was the first black that many of those people had ever seen. First one that they really had ever known. But I think the daughter's name was Carolyn. They were the city was having difficulty with the physician, the person who was city physician at the time. So Carolyn told her dad that they should give that job to me. Well, one day I was talking with one of my friends from the police department, and he said, "Percy, you're going to be city physician." And that was good news. I said, "How do you know that? Where did that come from?" He said, "Well, they're taking a poll." And I said, I'm not going to come out well in that. And I didn't. But nonetheless, they voted, would you find a black doctor acceptable? However it was worded, the answer for Percy Harris was no. They got a good doctor, a fellow by the name of Bill Bassett, who did an excellent job. But there were those people, Cole College personnel. There were a number of blacks and whites, and the black community supported me very strongly. It was small, but they supported me very strongly, and Cedar Rapids had a well-established middle class who had good jobs, and so they supported me from day one. And much of that was because a fellow by the name of Vernon Smith, who is now dead. Vernon knew a year in advance that I was going to be here, so he was working on things for me. But later, when I moved into the Garrison building, Dr. Estes from day one started to help me. Much of my practice could be traced back to his old practice.
But then when
his practice, rather.
You kind of got your foot in the door when you volunteered to help the Linn County coroner.
Well, that was just money. That was money that a white doctor would not take that job. In fact, a fellow by the name of Lou Feldman. Lou Feldman and his brother, I think, were the ones who started the May Drug Company. And Lou Feldman told me, he said, "You shouldn't take that job." He said, and I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it'll make it more difficult for you to start a practice." He said, "People don't want a dead man's doctor for their doctor." That turned out not to be, it turned out not to be a negative fact. In fact, it turned out to be positive, because my name was in the paper. I was connected with some early crimes, and as medical examiner with a couple of deaths, and also I don't know if you remember Walter Gormley. Walter Gormley was a person who refused to pay his income taxes because he didn't want. He was a pacifist, and I took care of Walter Gormley when he went on a hunger strike, and Walter wouldn't eat, and so he was arrested, and the sheriff. I should remember who the sheriff was at the time.
Smith?
But, was it?
Smith?
No, he was a Democrat. Yeah. But anyway, he asked, since I was a Democrat, he had me take care of Walter Gormley. And I remember teasing Walter Gormley about being on a hunger strike. I said, why do you let me feed you, give you these IV fluids? But nationally, it became, he was a big story. And Percy Harris's name was
out in front of the public every day in the press, and
somewhere or another, but generally very, very positive. But I can't overemphasize this group of people who were determined that Percy Harris was going to make it, and these were predominantly there was this black group, and then there were a group of Caucasians and college people. And I later generally, at least 2 or 3 of the presidents of college were patients of mine, and a large number of them of the faculty became patients, and that's a long story.
Yeah. Who was the Linn County coroner when you first got your?
A fellow by the name of. He was a doctor. He was a doctor of chiropractic. Navratil. Navratil left here, and he moved to the West because he liked to hunt. And he recommended to the Board of Supervisors that they employ me. So I became the coroner. And when the medical examiner system went into effect, I became medical examiner. No one wanted that job, I'm sure.
When was that? When it switched from coroner to?
I think 1962. Yeah. I think it was 62. Yeah.
What was your job when you helped? When you first started helping Dr. Navitro?
I was when he wasn't here and he was gone frequently. As I look back, which was fine. I did I was it.
You would try to determine how the person met his demise.
The medical examiner was charged with investigating certain types of deaths: homicides, accidental deaths, suicides, unnatural deaths. And when he, after one day, I was called by the sheriff's office, and they wanted me to go out on between here and Mount Vernon. And they found the remains of turned out to be a young lady by the name of Padfield. That case was never solved. And that was kind of big news. And again, it had my name in the paper. And then after that, one day, I was on my way to work, and I was called by the police department, and there was a man in a loan company on 2nd Avenue. You know where the merchants, there was merchants in those days where that ramp is. Well, next to there there were several buildings, and I think those buildings are still there, some of them anyway. And there was a loan officer had been killed, and that was again, it put my name out. Good publicity.
So this helped your business.
Yes, it people knew me. I know, I'm sure that there were a number of people who had persons who might have had the opportunity to have me as a doctor and decided no. Now, not all of those people were, I don't know who they are, but those are who they were, but they were not necessarily anti-black or whatever. But choosing a doctor is a big move, and so they did not. Many of them thought, well, it's all right, but not for me. I don't know any blacks. But I want to tell you one thing: that the only person who was meeting me face to face, who said that I don't want a nigger for my doctor, was a lady, and this was been probably 1958. If I may back up, I got a call from the county nurse, and she said, "Would you go see a patient for us?" And I said, "No." I said, "Does she have a doctor?" She said, "Yes, but he won't go see her." And I said, "Well, I don't want to do that. If he doesn't want to go, why should I?" And I felt guilty about that. So shortly after I terminated the conversation with the nurse, the county nurse, I called her. I said, "Did you find anyone to go see that lady?" She said, "No." I said, "I'll go see her." So I went over to see her. It was on the near west side, as I recall. And I went into this place, and it was a place. And I walked in, and her son greeted me, and he was nice. He later told me he knew when he saw me that there would be trouble. I went in, and this lady was lying on a bed, and I told her who I was. She looked up to me, and she said, "I don't want a nigger for my doctor." And so I said, "Fine." I said that you didn't select me. I was sent to see you, and I'll let the nurse know that you still need a doctor. So I left, and as I was going out, the son said, "The moment I saw you, I knew we were going to have a problem." But my success in terms of building a practice came as a result of a number of people, who I've said before, were dedicated to my success. Mm-hmm. And so I became the doctor for General Mills, and at some point, I had the best industrial positions. I was a physician with the biggest companies in town, mm-hmm. and it reached a point where I was saying no to some of them, mm-hmm. and that all went very well for me.
So when did you become the full-fledged Linn County medical examiner then?
Well, I'm the only one that's 1961 or 62, yep. But remember I started as mm-hmm. assistant coroner in the summer of 58, and then the coroner in maybe 1960, and then when the coroner's law went into effect, the medical examiner's law went into effect, I became medical examiner and continued from then until until I retired. Mm. In fact, officially, I was associated with the medical examiner's office until November of this year, because after I retired, I stayed on as one of the assistant medical examiners. So officially, from 1958 until to the year 2000. 2001, 2002 until 2000, November 2000.
44 years.
Yeah, I was associated with that.
What was the difference between the duties of a coroner and a medical examiner?
Well, first of all, the coroner's office was it was an elected office. It was political. There were no requirements, just to be able to get
elected.
To be able to get elected. The medical examiner in Iowa at the time, Iowa at the time I was at the time Iowa enacted the law went into effect in Iowa. The medical examiner's law. Iowa was one of only 12 states in the Union that had a medical examiner's law. You had to be either an MD or a doctor of osteopathy, and you were appointed by the Board of Supervisors upon the recommendation of the medical society, MDs or DOs. Well, there was again, it was not a job anyone wanted, and so I had it and I kept it. Yeah.
Did you get compensated by the case, or
by the case? I think that initially about $15 a case.
Yeah. And did you find yourself? Did you get to the point where that was interfere with your practice?
Oh, sure. But I couldn't look at it that way. It was a responsibility I had, and yeah. And the county supervisors realized later, as my practice grew, that it was a big problem. And I must say that the county was very nice to me.
Was this something you was able to put out of your mind when you went home at night, or did you find yourself churning away as to what possibly could have happened to the person? Or
it depended. It depended on the nature of the death. Felix Barter was the first policeman who was killed that I can remember, and he might have been the first one that was killed in a long time. But that wouldn't bother me. Oh, all of those shooting deaths, the homicides that we did not solve, these sudden infant death syndromes, where young babies without any apparent cause just died. All those things bothered me.
what was your most bizarre case when you look back?
I've had so many bizarre cases that I really can't rank them. But in recent years, there was not recent years, in the past 15 or 20 years, a lady was killed by her boyfriend, and he put her he took out, after he killed her, he took her freezer, took all the food out of her freezer, and put her into the freezer. But she was already dead. Her children had become concerned because they'd not seen or heard from their mother. And in the meantime, the boyfriend was going around selling the meat that was in the freezer. And that was a bizarre one. But I've had some murder-suicides and also some other homicides, deaths that were very bothersome, but I don't know. If I had to rank one as being worse than another, I couldn't do that.
In, I think, 1961, Percy, by this time you and your wife had 7 children. Did housing become a problem with this many children, or?
Well, the problem that we had started when we came here, with the inability of the hospital to find, St. Luke's Hospital to find accommodations for a black doctor. It wasn't because of the size of the family, it was because we were black. So what the hospital, and I want to say that the St. Luke's Hospital, under the leadership of Lou Blair, and Mr. Blair and I have remained friends throughout all of these years. In fact, I just saw him the other day. In fact, it was at Mrs. Armstrong's memorial service. But the hospital, what they did, remember my wife is living in Waterloo with her mother, staying in Waterloo with her mother. So St. Luke's had a school of practical nursing, and they were in the School of Practical Nursing was a house that was owned by St. Luke's at 1101 A Avenue, Northeast, just across the street from the hospital. So in looking around to do what they could to find accommodations for me, the hospital, I think, owned the interurban station. You remember that? It was at A Avenue and 10th Street. And they moved the School of Practical Nursing out of this house, vacated the house, and moved the School of Practical Nursing down to this other building. And so that was our home. Now, all sorts of blessings came as a result of having been discriminated against. The big one was that I was just across the street from the hospital, and then that was long before they had doctors to man those the trauma centers, or emergency rooms as they were called. So people who went to the hospital as a result of didn't have a doctor, and they needed a doctor right away, say if there was an accident or something, the nurses who, and some more than others, called me. And so that I started to build up a practice. And some of the patients who decided to come to me, who didn't have me as a doctor, but they saw me in the emergency room taking care of someone else, and they decided that they wanted to have me as a doctor. And as I started to say, some of those people remained with me until I retired. I don't want to mention names, but I remember one time a man who was from Alabama or Mississippi, Caucasian. The nurse was taking care of something, and I said, "Well, why don't you do this for the person?" His doctor wasn't there, and he decided after I started practice that he wanted me as his doctor. As a southern, either Alabama or Mississippi, I can't remember what. But anyway, he decided I was going to be his doctor, and I was his doctor until his death, and doctor for his wife and his kids, grandkids, his brother-in-law, until I retired. There were this all sorts of problems. I remember my first OB patient, the one for whom I had responsibility from the beginning of her pregnancy up until from the beginning of the pregnancy until the delivery. And one day this young lady came up to my office, and she said she'd gone and she didn't have a doctor, but she was downtown, and she went into the guarantee building, and she saw that there were several doctors in the building. And so the elevator operator sent her up to me. And she came in, and she said, after I talked with her, she said, "I'll have to see what my husband has to say." And I knew what that meant. Well, to make a long story short, that lady they were from Indiana, I think. And the husband was a little bit upset, but he said yes, she could. Now, make a long story short, as I said a few minutes ago, they became very, very good friends, and very instrumental in dealing with a rumor that was trying to destroy me in this town. Not trying to do it, was very destructive. And we found out one day she was in the in the emergency room, and she was crying. And she said, after I had seen her, I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Are you and Mrs. Harris going to get a divorce?" I said, "No." I said, "No." She said, I knew about the rumor, and the rumor was all over. She said, she said, I was in a real estate office the other day, and this fellow just out of the blue said, "Have you heard a rumor about Dr. Harris?" And she said, "What rumor?" So he proceeded to tell her that my wife and I were separated, and I had my nurse pregnant and something like that. And I said, "We can stop that." I said, "We can stop that with your help." So she said, "I don't want to get into any trouble." But she said, "But if you decide to do something, then I'll stick with you." So she said, "I'll have to get his name." So she went back and got the pictures, looked at the pictures from the real estate office, and she said, "It's this fellow." So a few days later, I walked into that real estate office. It's, I won't identify it. And I walked in, and I said to the secretary, I said, "My name is Percy Harris, and I want to see that man, Mr. So-and-so." Now, the realtors had, they were they had their desk in a row, and 2 rows. And I went over to this gentleman, and I said, "I'd like to talk with you." And I said, I can do it here, or we can do it in a private room if you have. So we went into a private room, and I don't remember this realtor's name. And I said, you've been spreading rumors about me. And I said, you have no way of knowing if what you're saying is the truth. And I said, you are not the only one that has spread these rumors. I said, but you're the one that I'm going to use to stop them. And I said, I have a witness. And I said, now I'm going to sue you unless you can have a letter of apology written to me and delivered before I close my office today at 5. In the meantime, I can't remember how I knew this. The moment I walked in, everyone cleared that office except for the secretary, and she was listening at the door. I got a call from his attorney, and he said that call me, and he said, he didn't mean any harm. And I said, well, maybe he didn't, but I said I'm going to sue him unless he has a letter of apology to me. And so the attorney said, well, we'll get something together. And but the point is, it was this young lady and her husband who were able to stop. And the rumors stopped. Everybody stopped talking because that word got around. Of course, what the attorney probably should have done is said, and there wouldn't have been anything I could have done except that I could have made a fuss, I guess.
So did you find yourself getting other housing than where you lived when you first come to Cedar Rapids?
We lived in the house that St. Luke's Hospital provided. In the meantime, I looked for homes and was always very, very, all of my efforts were unsuccessful. Robert Armstrong became aware of our problem, and he took a strong personal interest in it.
Was he associated with St. Luke's at this time?
He was the superintendent of St. Luke. But and I don't want to prolong this, but I did not learn until maybe 10, 12 years ago how Mr. Armstrong became aware of our problem. Well, he was at a board meeting, and following the board meeting, he said to someone, and this is what I learned just a few years ago, why are the Harrises still living in that house? And the person to whom he made that remark said, they can't find a house because we have been unable to find homes for them. So anyway, Mr. Armstrong called me, it seems, almost daily and said, Percy, I've got another home place we should go look at. Well, all of our efforts were unsuccessful. Mr. Armstrong and Mrs. Armstrong decided the way they would resolve this problem would be as follows. St. Paul's Church, where they belong and I belong, decided that they were having a building campaign, and the Armstrongs decided that they would give 3 lots to the church as their contribution. And so they did. Mr. Armstrong told me what he had done, and I will not go into the politics of what went on at the church as a result of that. But in terms of those meetings at the board of directors, that's not the right name. But anyway, the
church council or
yeah, there's a name for it. But anyway, so he at the time he had 2 or 3 of the prominent realtors in his town appraise this property, and then ask them also the question, what will happen if Harris moves in? They said absolutely. They said nothing was going to happen. But he of course, you can imagine when he gave this land he told them that this is a land, it's appraised at this value, and I'm going to, and I've told Percy and Malia Harris that they should submit an offer on the land. It wasn't an offer. It was an offer, but it was at the appraised value. And I remember saying to Mr. Armstrong, I can't afford that. And he said, well, you have to. He said, you have to buy it. And so he said that, I said, well, he said, you can't afford it. You have to give the money. You have to pay the appraised value. So that led to a big fight within the executive committee of the church, and they could have objected to that for many different reasons. They didn't like the way it was done, but anyway, finally, as a result of the uproar, they decided that in order to give the church permission, they would have to have a vote of the church. And so they held a meeting at St. Paul's Church, packed. The church was packed. And it had been given, of course, a great deal of publicity. And the church voted whether to sell the lot to Linn and me. And so that day in December of 1961, the vote was the sale of the church to us, of the lot to us was approved. And that's how we solved our problem.
That's where you're living today, is on this lot?
This is the house.
What's the address of this?
3626 Beaver.
Yeah. If I remember history correct, due to time constraints, we can't go into the story anymore. But this become so out in front of the public that it almost split the church.
Oh, it did split the church. It split the church probably. Well, it split the church.
Yeah.
Let me say that most of the people who left the church came back.
Yeah. And not only that, but it got a lot of unfavorable national attention at that time.
Yeah, there was a couple of persons from, and this might have been before the sale was made, but two writers from Time magazine came out to do a story about our housing problem, but that was, I think, maybe that was before the church had become involved. Our minister was involved, Jackson Burns. But Jackson Burns, he discouraged Time magazine from writing an article. The two persons who were here, in addition to talking with me, went to the hospital with me on a couple of calls. But anyway.
Yeah. Were you instrumental in helping to get open heart surgery into St. Luke's when it first started?
Well, yes. I was, but with help from others. Mm-hmm. I was I was chief of staff, president of the staff at St. Luke's Hospital in 1976. A few years earlier, the Linn County Medical Society had completed a study to determine if it would be if the hospital should one of the hospitals should consider starting an open heart surgery, and a surgical department. So the decision by the Linn County Medical Society was voted down, or it was tabled, primarily because the doctors felt that it might hurt the university's program. And the university, of course, had said that, we can do all the heart surgery in Iowa. Well, that turned out not to be the case, but that was voted down. So I was strongly supportive of that, but I was not involved in that study. When I became chief of staff, one of the first things I did was to meet with with Al Curtis, who was superintendent of the hospital, and with his staff, and with some of the cardiovascular surgeons. And I told them that one of the goals I had was to get open heart surgery for St. Luke's Hospital, and we I had a committee chairman, a fellow by the name of Richard Sedlacek, and he was chairman of the equipment committee and something else. But they, in a period of a year, we got it through the staff, which was our biggest job. The most difficult job, and through the various committees that had to approve it, the governmental committees, and then the final committee the final approval had to come from a 1122 committee. I don't know what that stood for in Des Moines. Now, I knew on that 1122 committee that I had probably 2 votes. That we had 2 votes. One of them was my sister-in-law. Liz, the one that who was married to the doctor, and I knew that with her being there, she's very persuasive. That she would probably, I think maybe it was 5 or 7 people, but anyway, we went down and it was approved, and that's how St. Luke's Hospital came to offer to be the first to have, first and only to have open heart surgery. A monumental effort on the part of a number of people, but I never would want to downplay the fact that of the part that committee played.
So what year did you retire as a physician?
This is 2002, 2000, I guess. Yeah.
And you and Leela had how many children?
12 children.
12 children.
12, yeah.
Did
8 boys and 4 girls.
Did you? Did the 2 of you ever talk about that, wanting a large family, or did you just let things happen?
Family.
You always did.
We were. Lilia had always wanted a large family too.
Were you a close family?
Oh yes, very close, and we remain very close.
I can imagine when they were all growing up. I don't imagine they all lived at home at the same time.
No, there's no time where all 12 of them here together.
But the holidays had to have been a fun time.
And the holidays are still that way, maddening at times, occasionally.
You had served on many boards, and you've been the recipient of many awards, and different offices held. They're too numerous to mention, but there was a couple here I want to run by. You did serve on the Iowa Board of Regents for
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah. And I think that those were 12 good years for me. It was I don't know. I was in bed one night and reading the paper about the Board of Regents, and the phone rang. And there was a fellow, a person identified himself as being an assistant to Governor Ray. And he said to me, the governor would like to have you serve on the Board of Regents. And I said, there's no way I could do that. I don't want to. And I can't. And so there were several phone calls after that. And finally, the governor himself called. And he said, we want you to do it. And so I said, I'll talk with my family and I'll let you know. And this was probably July 4th or the 3rd or so, not the 4th or 3rd, although Governor Ray probably worked on the 4th too. And so I finally said yes, that I would. Now, what I didn't know is that the governor had been investigating me for some time. The governor's office, not for a long time, but a couple of weeks or whatever. And there had been this, people not investigating me, but getting recommendations. And it turned out that one of the places he'd gone was a big law firm, Republican law firm, in Cedar Rapids, and they only had good things to say about me. And so, that they had been looking at me for some time. I never knew exactly how they happened to have picked me, but I think the governor decided that for some reason he wanted a Democrat out of Cedar Rapids, and I had testified in a trial where a young lawyer from Cedar Rapids, he was in that very strongly strongly Republican law firm, and he recommended me. And later I asked him, why did you recommend me? He said, well, he said, you testified for me once. And he said, that. So that's how I got it.
You were active with the Jane Boyd
I was
Community
president
House?
of Jane Boyd Community House. It was one of my, one of my primary responsibilities as president was to help bring about change of leadership in the community house, and it was a very delicate issue. But we were able to do that, and it was things went very well.
We had interviewed some time back a Roby Kessler, and she
yes.
had mentioned
Yes.
working with you at the Jane Boyd House. NACP?
I was president of the NAACP for 1 year, and it was a good year. We belonged to Region 4, and there are Kansas City, I think, and Denver, Colorado. They were those are big centers, of course, and we outraised them in terms of money, in terms of life memberships, in terms of memberships generally. White doctors had the NAAC publication in their office. It was a great year.
Yeah. Viola Gibson, did you know Viola?
Extremely well. You know, as Mrs. Gibson was a friend, a teacher, and also we were almost everything that involved race. Where there was an effort to improve racial conditions for blacks in the city. Mrs. Gibson was the leader, and I was one of those who were among those followers.
In 1998, the Mercy Medical Center presented you with a very prestigious gold-headed cane award.
Yes.
Was this a award that went back many years?
I think that, yes, it did. And I think that back to the 1600s. And I was very surprised at that. But it was probably one of the, except for my wife presenting me with 12 kids, and my 12 kids were presenting me with all sorts of good things to say about them. It was probably the greatest honor that had been bestowed upon me.
All of those years as the medical examiner and a physician, I'm sure you were on call 24 hours a day.
Yes.
Did that ever cause you burnout, or
no? I was
is something you grow into?
Yeah, I grew into it, and I learned to, for the most part, getting up at night was not a bother for me. But if I was in the office and I got a call, it was difficult for me to leave an office of patients and go out on a medical examiner's case. But it worked out all right.
As far as being on call for the medical examiner's job, you just gave that up here just a couple months ago, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. Keep in mind that until my retirement, I was the only medical examiner the county had ever had. And I was looking through some old clippings the other day from the Gazette, and someone had written an article about it, and it said that the headline was Linn County, well, it's something to the effect that I had mentioned that I was the only county examiner that the county had ever known.
Could you attack it with the same enthusiasm as you did 30 years ago?
No, you mean could I do that now? Absolutely not. No. It was, in fact, I did not learn how difficult the job was, how time-consuming it was, until I became a deputy. When I became a deputy, then the billing and other things that I'd always had someone else do became my responsibility. And I said, oh, how did I ever do this? Well, the reason I did it, the way I did it, it's because of a lot of help. Had a lot of help. There's a comment or two that I'd like to make about housing. When we were looking for housing, I would drive around the city and in some instances looking at making house calls, but I also drove around the city looking for homes that I would try to buy which might be suitable for us. And so and I don't know, this might be exaggerated somewhat, but there were neighborhoods where if I were seen in a neighborhood, they'd get an attorney to start because they just assumed that I was going to looking for a place to live in that community, even though in some of those areas I was simply making house calls. Well, there's a group of people to whom I owe an apology. One day I came, this would have been 1959 or so, 1950 or 60, certainly before we moved here. I came home and my wife said, where is Grantwood Drive? And I said, I don't know. So I said, why? She said, a man just called and said, are you niggers moving on to Grantwood Drive? And so I said, well, let's find Grantwood Drive. So I called friends and found out where Grantwood Drive was located. And this is complicated because there were other, I won't go into that, but it was a complicated story. By this time, we had 2 cars. One of them was a Valiant. So I decided to put all of the kids into the Valiant and drive over to Grantwood Drive. And this was maybe 2 hours, 3 hours after the call. Drove over to Grantwood Drive, and as we turned into Grantwood Drive, there were some little kids who saw us and said, "Hi, we hope you move in." I should have listened to that. A few feet beyond the kids, there were a group of 10, 15, 20 people standing in the front yard of a house. And I said to Leah, slowed down, and as we drove in, the crowd turned in unison and looked at us. And I said, oh, those people are probably planning a picnic. And so we continued to drive up, and it was a cul-de-sac, and at the end of the house, it was a house that was for sale. And that house belonged to a pharmaceutical representative who was in my office that day, but didn't say anything to me about this house. However, he had contributed to the fear that at least one person had, who lived in the person who did the calling. He went back to pick up an aquarium, and while he was in that house, this person came up and said, "Are you going to sell this house to that nigger doctor?" And he said, it startled him. The man's name was Dick Layton, who owned the house and been a friend and was a patient of mine for many years until he moved from Cedar Rapids. And so Dick Layton he was surprised, but he didn't say yes and he didn't say no, and that created the fuss. Now, years later, maybe within the past 10 years, a lady was in my office, a patient of mine, and I took care of her father, her kids, and probably some of her grandkids. And I said, how long have you lived on Grantwood Drive? She said, "Oh, doctor," she said, we built that home. I said, "Most of the people over there." And I said, "Well, do you remember that day and years ago when you had the meet?" She said, "Yes," but she didn't want to talk about it, and it was clear that she did not. But then the next time she was in the office, she came in, and she had the names of all of the people, and she said the person who had inflamed the situation did not live on Grantwood Drive. Now, I had ill feelings. Well, I had ill feelings about Grantwood Drive, those residents on Grantwood Drive. And many years later, I learned, and this is what I want to say, that I owe an apology to those people. All of those people who were in that group were not opposed to my moving in. And the person who had triggered all of this was a person who lived on 25th Street or someplace, but did not live on Grantwood Drive. And so while there are those stories about people not wanting us in, there was that group of people who, they were holding a meeting, but that meeting was not they were positive about our moving in. So I apologize to them.
Due to time constraints, Percy, we'll have to draw this tape to a close unless you have any other memories. The Linn County Historical Society, the Linn County History Center would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
Thank you.